Yeah, thanks a lot. Actually, I'm going to talk only about the last line more thoroughly in this title. So in her seminal essay, Throwing Like a Girl, Young argues that there's a relevant difference in body style and extension between men and women in patriarch societies. And she describes a particular feminine style of interacting with the world. And this style is manifest in the way in which the relevant women she refers to experience their movement as inhibited and their life, their lived space as confined. While Young focuses on aspects of disempowerment, I wish to investigate a further potential in her analysis. Body orientations, such as the one described by Young and also many others, do not merely organize a sense of instrumental impossibility or possibility or impossibility. I try to argue that they also organize a pre-reflective sense of being in the right or not being in the right, not being entitled to take up space, for instance. So, and well, now I cannot really move the, okay, where is it? There. I think if you read my abstract, you probably expect a structure for this talk that goes like this, but then I learned I have only 20 minutes, so I better focus on this. I think I give you a very, very brief introduction into Young's account of feminine motility, and then the major part of my talk would be the phenomenology of bodily expansion and the sense of being in the right, as for wanting a better term for this. And perhaps I will also be able to relate some empirical findings regarding bodily expansion and the sense of doing right. But I'm not, yeah, we will see whether, or maybe we leave that for discussion. So I think this idea of bodily orientation and sense of doing right or being in the right, or sense of being entitled to this and that is a very little puzzle piece for the with regard to the topic of this conference, but maybe it's a useful puzzle piece. I guess we will try to discuss that in the after the talk. Okay, but let's begin with Young's account of the feminine motility. So the type of women Young refers to tend, that is a quote, tend not to open their bodies in their everyday movements, but tend to sit, stand, and walk with their limbs closed or enclosed around them, and also perceive themselves as less capable of putting their whole bodies into engagement in a physical task with the same ease and naturalness as men. Okay, that text is from 1980, and I guess, again, I have to leave that for the discussion to what extent it is still a relevant text for today. But I'd like to take some of her observations and relate that to some broader ideas about the embodiment of one's sense of entitlement, subjective sense of entitlement. So this rather contractive style of interacting with the world is manifest in a certain inhibition of unfolding one's movement and expansive tendencies of seizing the surrounding space or expanding one's power. That's a quote: "Feminine existence lives space as enclosed or confining as have a dual structure, and the feminine existent experience herself as positioned in space." The relevant bodily orientation is described as some sort of fundamental attunement to the invading and objectifying gaze of others that in turn is supposed to communicate patriarch normativity in a palpable way. And as I said, while Young focuses on disempowerment, I wish to investigate a further potential in her analysis. I hope to show that bodily orientations are not only relevant with regard to what I can or cannot, I can do this or cannot do this. I try to show that they are also relevant in terms of what the agent feels they are entitled to do. I may do this or may not do that, for instance, for wanting of a better phrase. And yeah, and I think regardless to what extent this issues such as manspreading, for instance, actually is a gender-specific phenomenon or phenomenon at all, this is also, I think, something we could leave for discussion. But I think whatever one thinks about it, the idea behind it, or the idea behind the criticism of something like manspreading, for instance, is, I suppose, this embodied entitlement, which I try to, the subjective sense of entitlement, that is the target of the criticism here. And this is what I try to, or this subjective sense of entitlement is what I try to elucidate a bit more thoroughly. So let us therefore have a closer look at the spatiality of the ecstatic and feeling body, to which Young's and many other accounts refer to. So various accounts have highlighted some sort of projective movement being integral to the agent's orientation toward their environment. This bodily projection coordinates, among other things, the here as the agent's 0 point of orientation, as Husserl, for instance, would call this, with the there in the agent's environment. Referring to Merleau-Ponty, Young calls this this projection, what I call projection here, she calls transcendence, that moves out from the body in its immanence in an open and unbroken directedness upon the world in action. The projection inherent to the ecstatic body is even further qualified in terms of particular feelings. On the level of bodily feeling, here is sensed as a pole, as the anticipated end of more or less contractive tendencies, such as in startle. I'm referring to a phenomenologist called Hermann Schmitz here. And in contrast, the bodily sense of directing oneself towards there, connected with a more expansive feeling, as for instance in reaching out, or even letting one's eye wander until something blocks the view, for instance. This is yeah, the bodily sense of expansion, and more or less subtle sense of expansion. And the example of wandering, letting one's eye wander until something blocks its way, for instance, that also suggests that the intensity of contractive and expansive feelings need not be in direct proportion to the intensity of physical movement, since even subtle physical movement may entail quite palpable instances of contraction or expansion. That's why we also refer to the feeling body, to notion of the feeling body. And in terms of bodily feeling, projection in the sense I intended here is felt as an expansive movement from the narrow here to a less narrow there. And this is usually the end of the discussion of this bodily projection. So usually the discussion is limited to the instrumental and aesthetic dimension of practical orientation, just sketched. So one might discuss problems like, how can I get through that door? Or what is involved in jumping over a creek? What prevents me from making full use of my body's spatial and lateral possibilities when throwing, as for instance Young does in her text? these and many other examples present the body of the agent in an abstraction from the social sphere, in which alone an ethical dimension of bodily projections could be addressed in any meaningful way. So we might ask, if we don't want to stop here, we might ask, in which way does the dynamic of bodily projection change if we are dealing with situations in which the direct or indirect presence of other agents is relevant? And yeah, think for instance of Arendt's descriptions of the tension that an agent needs to overcome in order to insert themselves into the world shared with fellow human beings. So if you read these passages in Arendt, it's like, yeah, she uses metaphors of projecting oneself into the world, and she also addresses a particular tension. Or think of the way in which other persons are present in what Sartre calls the look or the gaze. The gaze is palpable in a number of different types of scenarios. For instance, when the agent is directly looked at by the other, or when the agent merely hears the other person's steps in the hallway, or when the other is present in a more anonymous way, just in the sense when you're speaking in front of an audience. There's not a concrete other, but there's still something like the gaze of the other involved in that situation, kind of tension. And all these different types of scenario differ regarding the agent's direct or indirect exposure to the gaze of the other. And yeah, in all those scenarios, other agents are conceived of in terms of some sort of force field that palpably interferes with the agent's bodily projections. You can find that in Sartre, for instance. And the agent experiences these interferences in terms of alienation from their unencumbered projecting into the environment. And this alienation comes in different shades, depending, among other things, on intensity and directness of the gaze. It may vary from shame-like feelings, such as to something as a subtle shyness, for instance. But in one way or another, it involves a bodily sense of being exposed to centripetal forces. And certainly Sartre's example with the voyeurs is one of the most famous examples. And he even uses this kind of language there, that the world, the agent's projections flow or even bleed toward the other person, who is the new center of the force field of bodily projections. And in the context of her analysis of female motility, Jung discusses this alienation in terms of an ambiguous transcendence in which the agent's projection is encumbered with centripetal forces, and inhibited intentionality of the I can, and this continuous unity of the body and its surroundings. And according to Sartre, the only possible defense available to the agent consists in the attempt to reverse the force field, to project, to throw back the gaze, or to project the gaze back to the other person. And then a more or less subtle fight for dominance unfolds in the context of which the agent's bodily projection into the environment is palpably modified. And there's an interesting dynamic that is that goes under various names. For instance, mutual incorporation, and for instance, the German phenomenologist Hermann Schmitz. And I've also prepared a longer quote from him, but I think I will leave that out due to time. But the interesting aspect is that this dynamic is characterized as an oscillation of dominance and devoutness between both participants that happens unthematically, more or less. pre-reflectively, because in any kind of conversation, face-to-face conversation, there is this kind of subtle fight for dominance or oscillation of dominance in the in both partners of the conversation. While they are focused on the topic of the conversation, this is something that is part of their more unthematic awareness, and it happens below whatever these the participants are thematically aware of. But the interesting aspect of that, I will spare you the quote. The idea is that what is negotiated below this, focusing on various topics of the conversation, is also the attempts of one partner to catch on with the other, and the way in which the other partner accepts this or doesn't accept that. So this is what this unthematic fight for dominance is more or less about, and it is in so far it is ethically relevant in because it entails also a claim to be recognized by the other. And this claim in question is not yet about being recognized in terms of universal human rights, for instance. It is, so to speak, further below that layer of recognition. The claim is about counting or weighing in a particular manner in that particular encounter with that particular person.
Henning, could you come to an end? Then we had the possibility to get some questions.
Yeah, I think I have 3 minutes left, don't I?
Okay. Yes. Of course. I just want to remind you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So this claim is, for instance, made whenever you address the other in a specific tone. So this is also very, very much below what we are reflectively aware of. And this claim is also connected to be recognized in a particular way. It's and this has to do with the idea that the agent deems it appropriate, the way in which they address the other in that conversation, for instance. So what Arendt, for instance, quotes, like, we deem ourselves fit for appearance, for instance. So that is what is claimed in that. And the idea is that this expansive reaching out to the other is connected with that, systematically connected with that claim to do it right, or to be in the right when addressing the other in this and that manner, when having this tone, and or casting this kind of gaze to the other, addressing the other with this gaze. So, and this is, I think, the heart of what I'd like to present here. There's also empirical findings, but I leave that out, so we can see that what I just presented is the view from the inside of the agent, so to speak, how it feels to the agent, this kind of expansive, this sense of expanding into the situation when addressing the other, and this being systematically connected with the sense of doing it right, or being in the right when this is being in the right when addressing the other in this or that way. And there are also empirical findings regarding the outside, so to speak, when you see people puffing up or shrinking back from doing this or that. So there also seems to be quite a kind of consistent connection between an expansive posture and the expression of being in the right. For instance, with regard to the sincereness with which one affirms particular values or rejects others. Okay, so what I try to come up with here in this talk is that I try to elucidate that there's a subjective sense of being entitled to act or to speak in a particular manner, to be right to do so, or to do it right when addressing the other in a particular manner. And that this subjective sense of being entitled to act or speak in that manner is embodied. And that means it's systematically connected with the phenomenology of particular expansive feelings, for instance. And if this is true, then, or this is by and large correct, then we could also conclude that inhibited bodily expansion, for instance, as in that female motility as described by Jung, then we could say, well, this is not only connected with a decreased sense of instrumental capability in the sense of I cannot do this or that, but also might also be connected with a decreased sense of being entitled to act or speak in a particular manner. And thank you for your patience.